Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Let me start with just one tweet. I'm not going to dive into all the data points today. This is China versus Italy via Tweet Ando, and it's comparing admittedly different dates, but it's showing you what an exponential, multiplicative and non-linear surge looks like. And Italy really threw a curveball yesterday. But essentially, in my article on the 24th, I said the viral moment has arrived, and this is clear evidence of it. And there is a lot more evidence from everywhere now, and it's just undeniable and irrefutable from my perspective, and I think anybody else's. This is China February PMI. A lot of folks were talking about a V-shaped recovery. I think that's impossible. And essentially, I think if the Chinese state forces its people back to work, you're going to get a massive second round of infections. And that would absolutely crater the economy for longer. So it's a kind of trap. You've got to stay down here at zero or practically zero. This PMI shows a low print from 208. The biggest difference between the present sell-off and most previous ones is that the latter were mostly endogenous market dynamics. Here you have an exogenous uncertainty that remains unresolved, and I think that's the important takeaway point. I know there is an absolute flurry and urge for rate cuts. The markets are now pricing in almost 4 rate cuts in the US this year. This is from Robin Brooks. But essentially, so 4 rate cuts this year. This would leave the Federal Reserve with almost no room to stimulate in case of a recession after a coronavirus-induced downturn. And I responded to Robin saying a rate cut or even 4 will produce a dead cat bounce, which might be quite brutal and vicious as they are in bear markets, but then a further dynamic move to the downside. I don't believe policymakers can vaccine the market with rate cuts. This is a non-linear and exponential virus, and a linear response will compound the debacle in my view. Here is something interesting. We had an enormous sell-off in the price of gold on Friday, as I think everyone liquidated anything they could. But look at these forward curves. The Brent forward curve is showing you a downward slope. The gold forward curve is showing you an upward slope. And I would argue strongly that this is the time to be getting long gold. It's a unique tactical opportunity. I know Henrik, who really called it well, is very, very bearish, and follow him. He's on Twitter, and he's been proven correct in the last few sessions. But essentially, I think gold is a hedge against this outrageous black swan that we're facing globally. Gold remains inside a bullish picture as long as it holds above 1,535. Well, currently it's 1,604. Let's see where we close this week. I think we'll close at a fresh 7-year high. This is the Dow Industrial Index compared with the dollar. This is from Popescu. And we've seen a sell-off in the dollar, largely mirroring what's going on in the Dow. Let's divert into some home thoughts for a moment. A real 21st century man. This is a Sikh man. Mohinder Singh and his son risked their lives. I just saw people. I saw little children. I felt they were my children and that nothing should happen to them. Risked their lives to transport dozens of Muslim neighbors to safety. And in a world of increasing ethnocratic nationalism and splitism, these sorts of people are the real men in my view. This is the Shah Jahan Masjid in Thatta, 1647, William Dalrymple, who's not only an accomplished writer, but a great photographer as well, as you can see from this. 1750 AD, The Last Supper, Ethiopian wall painting, tempera on linen, mounted on panel. That's from our Haplord, who tweets the most wonderful historical artifacts. And it made me think of that sentence. It certainly feels like a decade of semiotic arousal, when everything it seemed was a sign, a harbinger of some future radical disjuncture or cataclysmic upheaval. The family which drinks together stays together, true for tigers also, while mother is on a watch, picture by Vinod Goel from Western India via Parveen Kaswan. Took me back to a comment made by an archaeologist. The problem is not that things become buried far down in the strata, but that they endure, outlive us, and come back at us with a force which we didn't realize they had. A dark force of sleeping giants. The link is there for that. This is Sunday in Diani, searching for whale sharks, but got distracted with dozens of dolphin and fishermen, beauty and magic everywhere. That's Dr. Paula Kahumbu. Yesterday at Whale Shark Adventures in Diani, Kenya, false collar whales was spotted in a rare encounter. Don't worry, they're not at all dangerous. Listen to them chat to each other. Really very good. Political reflections. I saw this flash over my Twitter feed, F. Dilek Uyar, Bitlis Turkey 2019, and it's a shepherd with his flock of sheep. And it made me think of all those refugees who are being pushed to the Greek border, and that they are being treated as sheep as well. And I concluded by calling it Matters Geopolitical, Erdogan, Syria and Europe. It's complete chaos, a senior administration official said. Everyone is just trying to get a handle on what the expletive is going on, Washington Post. Minutes before President Trump was preparing Wednesday to reassure a skittish nation about the coronavirus threat, he received a piece of crucial information. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention had identified in California the first US case of the illness not tied to foreign travel, a sign that the virus's spread in the United States was likely to explode. A White House scrambling to gain control of a rudderless response defined by bureaucratic infighting, confusion, and misinformation. It's complete chaos. When Trump stepped in front of the cameras, he had not slept for a day and a half, 2.5 days. And he looked as if he hadn't. He looked very dazed. As acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney told a gathering of conservatives Friday morning, the president offered an account that was by turns misleading and sanguine. Trump did not, however, name a single czar, as some previous administrations have done during health emergencies. The president decided against that option after worrying that bringing in a person from outside the administration might be seen as a failure, and wondering whether such a person would be loyal to him, according to those familiar with the debate. I'm going to come to this point because his response has been so similar to the response of Xi Jinping. It's going to disappear one day. It's like a miracle. It will disappear, Trump said. And from our shores, it could get worse before it gets better. It could maybe go away. We'll see what happens. Nobody really knows. And as I said, the viral moment has arrived, and now it's arrived in the United States. For Trump, it is a mirror image of the risk and the trap that Z fell into head first. You dilly-dally, you get skewered, and it remains non-linear and exponential. And you end up at a Groucho Marx moment. Who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? And that takes me back to the vanity of vanities of some of our leaders. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. There is no remembrance of former things, and there won't be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. Took me back to that article in China File. You will all be no better than fields of garlic chives, giving yourselves up to being harvested by the blade of power, time and time again. What is thriving, however, is all that ridiculous red culture and the nauseating adulation. Just listen to how Pence started his presentation, that the system heaps on itself via shameless pro-party hacks who chirrup hosannas at every turn. They now turn to rule over the people by means of what could be dubbed big data totalitarianism and WeChat terror. And what is clear is that the CCP, which I said, suppressed information until we reach that Groucho Marx moment. And Trump is seemingly doing the same thing by closing down voices, specifically of his scientists. And I agree with Dan Rather that in a crisis, especially of an multiplicative sort like this, one of the most precious commodities for a government is its credibility. Trump, at his rally in South Carolina, dismissed worries about the coronavirus as the new hoax. Please caption this, Rollins Martin. Listen to Trump's spiritual advisor, Paula White, expelling the coronavirus. This is from How Root. As I've said previously, viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics, and that a non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine, in point of fact. Taleb, thanks to its precautionary policies and speed of implementation, the safest place for anyone from the coronavirus may soon be China. They've taken steps which I think few other people can take, which is just blocking people into their homes, but I'm not sure that their approach has been an optimal one. The Chinese laboratory that first shared the coronavirus genome with the world has been ordered to close for rectification. That's South China Morning Post. Zhang's team isolated and finished the genome sequence of the then unknown virus on January 5, 2 days before China's official announcement that mysterious pneumonia cases in Wuhan were caused by a hitherto unknown coronavirus, and I'll come to this in a minute. The laboratory at the Shanghai Public Health Clinical Center, Shanghai, was ordered to close a day after sharing the genome sequence. It was released on open platforms for scientists. Yanir Bariam, first thoughts on super spreader events for coronavirus and why stopping them is extremely important. A super spreader is kind of a human example of the hyper-connectedness of the world in which we live. Iran is also an outlier. Coronavirus epidemic in Iran has passed the crisis level. The country is imploding, law and order to disappear in the next few days, Aliostad. A number of officials have already died, and mass infection among hospital staff and police forces have been reported. The regime hid the initial cases, since it was just before the election and they needed a high turnout. Due to the political need, did not stop flights to China. Source seems to be clerical students from China who arrived in Com. Did not close religious shrines. Instead of providing information on the gravity of the risks to the public, played them down and resorted to the same tactic of rhetoric: we will fight and beat it. Now it has spread everywhere. The world now has an example on what failure to contain the virus can do. An MP who was elected during the election 2 weeks ago has died. He was from the province of Gilan. And I was writing about Iran with respect to Trump's financial and warfare strategies. And I quoted Hunter S. Thompson, if you remember. There is no honest way to explain it, because the only people who really know where the edge is are the ones who have gone over. The WHO chief on coronavirus says global markets should calm down and try to see the reality. He said in Riyadh, we need to go into the numbers, we need to go into the facts and do the right thing instead of panicking. Panic and fear is the worst. Containment works, but at the same time, we cannot be sure. This thing could change direction and be worse. That's why we prepare for the worst, he said. 24th of February, I said, who is captured? And millions of lives have been trifled with. The game is up, I wrote. COVID-19 prevention and control mechanisms were initiated immediately after the outbreak was declared. This is the WHO report after their visit to China. Really? Because reports about a pneumonia of unknown etiology in Wuhan were being censored as late as January 2nd. The fawning tone only gets worse as the ensuing paragraphs are peppered with words like remarkable, invaluable, striking, uncompromising, relentless, exceptional. Makes you wonder whether a publicity department official had to sign off on the final report. One thing we can probably all agree on, at the individual level, the Chinese people have reacted to this outbreak with courage and conviction. I couldn't agree more. It's hard to take its obsequious missives on the COVID-19 situation in China seriously these days, says David Polk. In conclusion, I get that it's important for the WHO to maintain a good relationship with China, the second biggest donor to the UN after the US, but it's hard to take its obsequious missives on the COVID-19 situation in China seriously these days. This is our Spanish flu, regardless of what the authorities have told you about not panicking. Act accordingly, real VJ. And the problem is this: respiratory machines and ventilators are very expensive, and it's not possible for hospitals to stock up on these. If you're the 50th person entering a hospital system in need of treatment for viral pneumonia, you may get help. What if you're the 5,000th? I wrote over the weekend about the origin of the coronavirus. And I relied on Scott BurkΞ777, who starts a Twitter thread, want to go down a strictly fact-based rabbit hole. I've put together a timeline of facts to help understand the controversial links between COVID-19 and HIV, and COVID-19 in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. I do think, however, that information is being downplayed and suppressed by some scientists and media outlets, and it's our duty to find out the facts about this virus, do what we can to mitigate the outbreak and prevent it from happening again. Ready? Original SARS, which is a type of coronavirus, SARS infects cells through the ACE2 receptor in hosts. The S-spike protein plays a key role in how the virus infects cells. Each of the little spikes that surround the coronavirus is a spike protein or S protein. The S-spike protein plays a key role in how the virus infects cells. That's what gives the coronavirus its name, its crown of these spikes. The S protein binds to the targeted cell through the ACE2 receptor, and boom, your cell is infected and becomes a virus replication factory. After the first SARS outbreak, there was a land rush to find other coronaviruses. A collection of SARS-like coronaviruses was isolated in several horseshoe bat species over 10 years ago, called SARS-like CoVs or SLCoVs, not SARS exactly, but coronaviruses similar to SARS. In 2007, a team of researchers based in Wuhan, in conjunction with an Australian laboratory, conducted a study with SARS, a SARS-like coronavirus, and HIV. The researchers noted that if small changes were made to the S protein, it broke how SARS-CoV worked. It could no longer go in via ACE2, so they inferred the S protein was critical to the SARS attack vector. Predicted based on the S-ACE2 binding structure that SARS-like CoVs were not able to use this same attack method, ACE2 mediation, decided to create a pseudovirus where they essentially put a SARS-like CoV in an HIV envelope. It worked. Using an HIV envelope, they replaced the RBD receptor binding domain of CL-SOV with that of SARS-CoV and used it to successfully infect bats through ACE2 mediation. 12 years goes by, a SARS-like CoV begins sweeping the globe that is far more infectious than previous outbreaks. Ground zero for this outbreak, not the first human patient, but first spreading event, is considered to be the Wuhan Seafood Market, which is 20 miles from the National Biosafety Laboratory at Wuhan Institute of Virology. And then he's referring at what a team of Indian bioinformatics specialists at Delhi University who released a paper preprint. COVID-19 has a unique sequence, about 1,378 nucleotide base pairs long, that is not found in related coronaviruses. They claimed to identify genetic similarities in this unique material between COVID-19 and HIV-1. Specifically, they isolated 4 short genetic sequences in key protein structures, the receptor binding domain or RBD. 2 of the sequences were perfect matches, albeit short, and 2 of the sequences were matched, but each with an additional string of non-matching material appearing in the middle of the sequence. The paper was criticized. Numerous attempts have been made to debunk it. After the criticism, the authors voluntarily withdrew it, intending to revise it based on comments made about their technical approach and conclusions. One key debunking attempt claims this: the same sequences are found in a variant called beta CoV bat Yunnan RATG13/2013, which had been found in the wild in bats. This is an attempt to prove that it was not engineered, but mutated naturally in the wild. But there's a problem. The strain was only known by and studied at the Wuhan Virology Institute, and although they claim it was discovered in 2013, it wasn't published or shared with the scientific community until immediately after the Indian paper on January 27, 2020. The RATG13 strain publication and the HIV research paper from 2008 share an author. I discovered this on my own by comparing the 2 papers and then quickly realized this scientist's contact information was the information that Zero Hedge was suspended from Twitter for sharing. Their article, which I will not link to, identifies this author in question, including some contact information from the Wuhan Virology Institute website. There is a line of inquiry about how these sequences are remarkably stable in between the BAT-CoV and NCoV, where in nature they would likely have mutated in between their shared evolution. Also a call for greater scientific evidence that the strain was collected in the wild. Here is the only point in this thread where I will offer my opinion rather than a list of facts. In light of all the previous facts, the efforts to debunk the paper are not yet convincing in my view. The RATG13 paper makes the claim that that HIV-related material you identified that happens to protein fold to become a perfect attack vector for NCoV to attack ACE2, it's a relative of this other secret virus which came from the wild, which we forgot to tell the scientific community about until now for no reason. Here's the secret virus, it comes from bats, and here's the new virus. See, they have the same HIV-related sequences. So bats, totally not secret pathogen research, which escaped the lab. And then further buttressing those points, coronavirus far more likely than SARS to bond to human cells due to HIV-like mutation, scientists say. That was in the South China Morning Post. New coronavirus has an HIV-like mutation that means its ability to bind with human cells could be up to 1,000 times as strong as the SARS virus, according to new research by scientists in China and Europe. Scientists show that SARS severe acute respiratory syndrome entered the human body by binding with a receptor protein called ACE2 on a cell membrane. Other highly contagious viruses, including HIV and Ebola, target an enzyme called furin, which works as a protein activator in the human body. When looking at the genome sequence of the new coronavirus, Professor Ruan Jishu and his team at Nankai University in Tianjin found a section of mutated genes that did not exist in SARS, but were similar to those found in HIV and Ebola. This finding suggests that 2019 nCoV, the new coronavirus, may be significantly different from the SARS coronavirus in the infection pathway. The virus may use the packing mechanisms of other viruses such as HIV. According to the study, the mutation can generate a structure known as a cleavage site in the new coronavirus spike protein. Compared to the SARS way of entry, this binding method is 100 to 1,000 times as efficient. The paper is the most viewed ever on China RXIV. Meanwhile, a study by French scientist Etienne de Crowley also found a furin-like cleavage site that is absent in similar coronaviruses. The mutation, which Ruan's team described as an unexpected insertion, could come from many possible sources, such as a coronavirus found in rats or even a species of avian flu. Scientists found a section of mutated genes in the new coronavirus that were similar to those found in HIV and Ebola. 27th of January, I came to this intuitively, and I said some folks are even pointing the finger at the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the Wuhan BSL-4 laboratory, and surmising that the only explanation left is artificial DNA modification. 16th of February, possible origins of the coronavirus article by Botao Xiao and Lei Xiao. Surgery was performed on the caged animals and the tissue samples were collected for DNA and RNA extraction and sequencing. The tissue samples and contaminated trashes were source of pathogens. The principal investigator participated in a project which generated a chimeric virus using the SARS-CoV reverse genetic system and reported the potential for human emergence. A direct speculation was that SARS-CoV or its derivative might leak from the laboratory. In summary, somebody was entangled with the evolution of the 2019 nCoV coronavirus. 16th of February, looking at the phylogenetic tree recently published, derived using all the full genome sequence, we see the 2019 nCoV virus does not have clear monophyletic support given the bootstrap value of 75. I said then, there is no doubt there is a novel sequence in the 2019 NCOV, and this was confirmed by the dot plot. I then shared with you folks an article on Reddit, which said, let me return to the virus. Last year, large-scale anti-government protests erupted in Hong Kong. The Standing Committee of the Chinese Communist Party considered these to be a grave threat to the integrity and stability of the motherland. US government and the EU both knew that the Chinese was secretly working on a biological agent that was supposed to make the protesters docile and obedient. 5 million people left Wuhan before the quarantine. That's Dave Greenwich, 57. Epsilon theory, the Burbird, the flu idiocy, which continues. It's just incredible. Going back to Turkey, Lavrov, Syria has the right to fight terrorism, and Russia cannot and will not force to give it up that right. And it took me back to Lavrov when he said, if it looks like a terrorist, if it acts like a terrorist, if it walks like a terrorist, if it fights like a terrorist, it's a terrorist, right? Let's move on to the currency markets where there's expected fireworks. Euro dollar 110.44. Dollar index 97.971, Japanese yen 108.23. They're adding a lot of liquidity via repo. Swiss franc 0.9642, the pound 128.45. The Australian dollar 0.6530, India rupee 72.195, South Korean won 11.97, Brazilian real 4.47, Egyptian pound 15.59, and the rand broke through that key area 15.50. And is at 15.63. Euro dollar still pointing towards 106 as long as it holds below 111, says T commodity. Crude oil, which is bouncing right now, $46.20, but I agree with T commodity, who says it's targeting $42.36 to $39.19. Moving on, I've written an article about the COVID-19, Sub-Saharan Africa and the recession risk, and I'll just take some key pointers out of it. It's on the website on the front page. African Development Bank at the beginning of the year said the Africa's economic outlook continues to brighten. Its real GDP growth, estimated at 3.4% in 2019, is projected to accelerate to 3.9% in 2020. And 4.1% in 2021. IMF Sub-Saharan Africa growth is expected to strengthen to 3.5% in 2020-2021. World Bank regional growth is expected to pick up to 2.9% in 2020. But they wrote an interesting risk notice, a sharper than expected deceleration in major trading partners such as China, the Euro area, or the United States, would substantially lower export revenues and investment. A faster than expected slowdown in China would cause a sharp fall in commodity prices, and given Sub-Saharan Africa's heavy reliance on extractive sectors for export and fiscal revenues, weigh heavily on regional activity, which is precisely what's happening. African states most at risk from the physical spread of coronavirus: Algeria, Egypt, South Africa, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Morocco, Sudan, Angola, Tanzania, Ghana, and Kenya. That's from Pat Thaker. We now learn China's to take a third less West African oil as virus hits demand. The volume of crude that will be shipped to China from West Africa next month is set to drop by at least 10 million barrels as the demand destruction caused by the coronavirus hits home. If the flows transpire as expected, the tally would be the lowest monthly volume to China from the region since at least January 2012. This is what I call the China emerging markets frontier feedback loop phenomenon. I said this phenomenon was positive for the last 2 decades, but has now undergone a trend reversal. The fallout is being experienced as far away as Germany Inc. The Rand is the purest proxy for this phenomenon. I wrote this in September last year. African countries heavily dependent on China being the main taker are also at the bleeding edge of this phenomenon. The pressure will not ease soon, I said, but will continue to intensify. And then Jeremy Stevens, who's the chief economist at Standard Bank, said a 1 percentage point decrease in China's domestic investment growth is associated with an average 0.6 percentage point decrease in Africa's exports. 9th of December, I was saying it's time to big up the dosage of Quaaludes. Moodys at that point had downgraded Nigeria to negative, and we learned that foreign investors are propping up the Naira to the tune of $16 billion via short-term certificates. Everyone knows, I wrote then, how this story ends. When the music stops, everyone will dash for the exit, and the currency will collapse just like it's collapsing in Lusaka as we speak. Have a look at this. This is from Nonzo 2, the Moodys downgrade in a single graph. And now with the oil price falling, their ability to support this level of foreign money, hot money in their economy is not going to be there. All is not doom and gloom. 3 top performing African currencies against the dollar year to date have been the Ghana Cedi, which is up 6%, Egyptian pound 2.94%, and the Seychelles rupee up 2.12%. But debt burdens have increased and affordability has weakened across most of sub-Saharan Africa, and a shift in debt structures has left some countries more exposed to a financial shock. This is from Moodys. We've had the first report of COVID from Lagos, Nigeria. Pandemic is coming, Dr. Tom Frieden. Nigeria's first coronavirus case traveled through Lagos before detection. Italian man. Authorities are working to meet and observe all those who were on the flight with him and identify all the people he met and places he visited in Lagos, a city of 20 million people, before reporting to the hospital. They found over 100 people exposed to this first coronavirus case. And they're doing rather well if all this is correct, which I have no reason to doubt. Nigerian health authorities have reached out to over 100 people who had contact with the Italian man who tested positive for the coronavirus and asked them to remain in self-isolation. The Italian citizen arrived in Lagos early this week on a commercial flight from Milan and travelled to neighbouring Ogun State for business. He's the first confirmed case in sub-Saharan Africa. Lafarge Africa said it had quarantined 39 people who were in contact with him. Italian man tested positive for the virus, is in a stable condition and showing signs of improvement. He denied local media reports that the patient had tried to escape isolation due to poor conditions in the hospital, but said he was moved to another facility because the ward was undergoing renovation. And this is what exponential disease propagation looks like in the real world. Nothing, 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 then cluster, 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 then boom. I believe we're at the point of no return, and that viruses are non-linear and exponential. I did an interview with Bruce Whitfield when I talked about my extreme concerns about the coronavirus making landfall in Africa. Daily Beast was saying what's curious is the curious lack of cases in Africa, and I think it's more a case of diagnosis. You know, if you'd only diagnose 200, you're not going to find anything. Bole, for me, remains the epicenter of China-Africa connectedness, and super spreaders during incubation period could have been moving through Bole undetected by temperature readings. Bill Gates, this disease, when it comes to Africa, will be more dramatic than in China, and I don't want to play down what is happening in China. Ebola is terrible, but it's not a lightning flu. South African All Share down 10.59% year to date. Egyptian pound steady at 15.59. EGX 30 down 12.46%. Nigerian All Share down 2.33%. Ghana Stock Exchange down 2.01%. The IMF Executive Board concluded a 2020 Article 4 consultation with Zimbabwe, and it just makes horrible reading. Zimbabwe is experiencing an economic and humanitarian crisis. The economy contracted sharply in 2019, amplified by climate shocks that have crippled agriculture and electricity generation. The newly introduced Zimbabwe dollar has lost most of its value, inflation is very high, and international reserves are very low. Uneven implementation of reforms, notably delays and missteps in FX and monetary reforms, have failed to restore confidence in the new currency. Zimbabwe is facing an economic and humanitarian crisis exacerbated by policy missteps and climate-related shocks. FT, Zimbabwe's secret money printing threatens IMF assistance. Emmerson Mnangagwa, who took power in a 27 coup, pledged last May to implement a series of initiatives designed to stabilize the economy. IMF agreed to monitor the effort, but said the program was off track. Zimbabwe dollar has lost 90% of its value against the US dollar. Gold subsidy was one of the central reasons that the IMF came to a conclusion that the program is off track. And we've quoted Yuval Harari before, but money is accordingly a system of mutual trust, not just any system of mutual trust. It is the most universal and most efficient system of mutual trust ever devised. Locusts in the Horn of Africa, if I shut up heaven that there be no rain, or if I command the locusts to devour the land, or if I send pestilence among my people. That's from Chronicles. This is a tweet thread via man_integrated. Everything old is new again, it would seem. Horn of Africa is no stranger to infestations of desert locusts, an especially prolific breeder with a voracious appetite for vegetation of any kind. Last 100 years, there have been 7 locust-caused famines in the region. Locusts were also one of the plagues visited upon Egypt in Exodus. Desert locusts act in 2 distinct ways, depending on population density and availability of food. Under normal conditions, they are solitary and breed at a smaller scale. However, they become gregarious, social swarming when conditions become right. Desert locusts normally see their geographic reach and population density limited by their desert habitat. However, when rainfall unexpectedly peaks and drives new vegetation, populations can explode. Once in their gregarious phase, swarming behavior kicks in. One swarm of desert locusts at peak density can exceed 1,200 square kilometers, with up to 100 billion locusts per swarm. For comparison, the city of London is a bit more than 1,500 kilometers. The swarm will migrate as much as 200 kilometers a day and daily consume their own body weight in food. Notably, the swarms can easily fly long distances. The current swarms in Africa crossed the Red Sea from Yemen in 2019. Since the 1970s, FAO's Desert Locust Control Committee has operated the Desert Locust Information Service from its headquarters in Rome. The response to the plague is being attempted through a maze of acronyms, supragovernmental orgs, NGOs, and private interests. A single aerial sprayer can do about 2,000 acres a day under optimal resupply conditions. That means it would take 148 days to fully cover the area of just one mega swarm. Ethiopia only has 4 aerial sprayers in country, with a few more arriving in the coming weeks. Wait, there's more. Despite more than 20+ million people already affected by the current swarms, we're not even in the optimal breeding season for desert locusts. Between March and May, with normal rain, the population of locusts will swell 500x. He's then, what's the solution? There are 3 interconnected choke points to overcome: money, coordination, supply chain. Supply chain is the biggest one. There are relatively few efficient maritime gateways to the region, despite being on the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea. Primary port is Djibouti, with Mombasa in Kenya acting as the gateway for the southern portions of the Horn. Both are rife with bureaucratic delays, irregular vessel capacity, and subject to disruption in Indian Ocean Red Sea vessel traffic. Inland distribution infrastructure of the region is poor, bordering on impossible. Most of the rural areas most affected by the locusts are logistically inaccessible for the bulk liquid solutions most efficient for fighting the plague. Tremendous analysis, please have a read. Listen to Kalonzo Musyoka. I think our genes are strong because we have not heard of any coronavirus case on an African. We thank God. Interesting footage from Kipchumba Murkomen at the BBI rally in Meru. Nairobi All Share is down 10.7%. NSE20 has hit a 16-year low and is down 11.96% year to date. Thank you for listening.